Welcome, you happy warrior, to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where I, your rabbi, solemnly dedicate myself to revealing how the world really works. And that is only for you, you happy warriors, or you want to be happy warriors, or you happy warriors in training. Thank you for being part of the show, and thank you for everything you've been doing in the last couple of weeks for promoting the show, because our numbers have skyrocketed very gratifyingly. For me, it's exciting. It means that I find it easier to envisage each and every one of you listening to the show, which drives me to greater heights of achievement in terms of preparation and in terms of delivery. So imagine there you are driving down the road late one evening on a long trip. You're going to be driving for the next 9 or 10 hours. You're expecting to arrive at your destination at about 7 a.m. in the morning, and you've got a long way to go. It's 6 or 7 in the evening, and you're driving along and you see a man hitchhiking by the side of the road. You don't know what came into you. Maybe you were just filled with a sense of gratitude that instead of standing by the side of the road, you are driving a comfortable, safe, fast-moving automobile that is a pleasure to drive, and you just felt that you were overflowing with gratitude and you wanted to share some of that. And you stopped, and the man climbs in and becomes a passenger on your journey. And as you're driving along and the sun goes down, it gets dark, and the amount of traffic on the road diminishes, and there's long stretches of open highway with no gas stations and no off-ramps or anything. And you start thinking to yourself, my goodness, here I am. You're either a man or a woman. I think it's unlikely that women would stop for male hitchhikers. But at any rate, you start questioning, how safe are you? What you don't know about anything about this man. For his part, he looks at you and he sees you driving an expensive car and you're well dressed, and he thinks to himself, or you think that he may be thinking to himself, hello, we've got a soft target right here. Maybe, who knows, maybe he's a psychopath. Who knows if, middle of the night, remote, far off road, anything could happen. What is the most important thing you could find out about this man that would bring you some measure of comfort and security, a feeling of, okay, you know what, this is fine, stop worrying? What is the one thing? Would it help for you to know that he had a PhD, he had a doctorate degree in philosophy? Would that help you? No, it really wouldn't, not in the slightest. There's nothing in any study of philosophy that would play a role in providing you with a reluctance to kill somebody if it suited you. Right? There's nothing. What would it help if you knew that he was very knowledgeable about tying nautical knots? He could really work rope into all kinds of interesting patterns. No, that wouldn't tell you anything at all. I'll tell you the only answer that I can think of, and the only answer I can think of is that if it became apparent during the conversation that he is genuinely a Bible-believing Christian or a Bible-believing Jew. In that case, then he has a belief system that precludes him killing you and driving off in your car. There's a belief system, and it's pretty unequivocal. Thou shalt not murder is the sixth commandment. It's pretty direct. There's not a lot of confusion there. So you can then rely on that. And this is merely my attempt at an up-to-date version of a story that I heard repeatedly from my teachers about their teachers and the teachers of their teachers. Most of my spiritual background comes from Eastern Europe, from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. That's sort of where I am rooted spiritually, meaning that the teachers of my teachers came from that area, and it was lived in that area, and it was so strong that as a 16-year-old boy, when my father finished high school in a small town called Port Elizabeth on the Indian Ocean side of South Africa, 16 years old, he traveled by himself, long journey, by ship to Europe, and he attended a Bible college in Lithuania for many years, in fact, until World War II had broken out. So I know a lot of stories, a lot of things. I've picked up a lot of the atmosphere of that time and that period. And here's one of them that you may not have heard. And that is that the way you traveled between towns back then in that part of the world was mostly by wagon. Motorized vehicles were just coming in, and I'm not talking about my father's time. I'm talking about a generation or two before that. And if you were traveling to any major city that was on a railroad, then you found your way to the nearest town that had a railway station, and then you took a train for the bulk of your distance and of your journey. But if that wasn't possible, let's say you were going to the next town to see family or to visit another rabbi for the Bible festival coming up, whatever, people traveled for these reasons. And of course, for business was the most predominant reason. And it was always dangerous, right? Because it was a journey that was almost always involved overnight. It was between two towns, and it went through remote and isolated territory, and it was not in the least bit uncommon, unfortunately, for the wagon driver to rob his businessmen passengers, steal their money, and leave their bodies in a forest that they were passing through. This unfortunately happened a lot. And so over the period of time, Jews who traveled learned that there was only one way to try where you stood a chance of protecting yourself, and that was they always watched to see if their wagon driver crossed himself as he passed by the church. And if he did, they felt reasonably confident that he was an honest driver and he would deliver them to their destination for the agreed-upon fee. But, as sometimes happened, the wagon driver failed to pay any note to the church as they drove past, and at that point the Jewish businessmen would almost invariably pay off the driver, get off, and try for another wagon. And wagons were the taxis of the day. That's how it used to be. And so really the idea that knowledge tells me anything about someone else's behavior, or for that matter about my own, is a rather foolish notion, because in reality it's only beliefs that actually do shape my behavior and my action. Beliefs and behavior are very linked in that fashion. So to the extent that I have anything of integrity about me, that would be because of things I believe, not because of things I know. The reality is one of the biggest problems that the financial services industries have, banking, finance, investments, is how do you determine the trustworthiness of the people you hire, given the huge sums of money involved? It's as far back as 1995 that one of the most stunning examples took place. Nick Leeson was a young person with very good credentials who knew a whole lot, and he had studied a great deal, and he had excellent qualifications. He was hired by Barings Bank, which was a very old, well-established, strong bank. It's a bank that used to take care of high net worth individuals around the world. And at one point, Nick Leeson was dispatched to either open, I don't remember, or to run the Singapore branch of the bank, certain aspects of the bank. And so he went to Singapore, and that was when he went rogue, and he literally took the bank down. I mean, he did things that he shouldn't have done in order to benefit himself. The sums involved were like in the billion-dollar range. And would you believe it, but a strong, old-established bank like Barings Bank was brought to its knees, bankrupted, and finally had its doors shut because of what this one man did, who over a period of time built up trust in him. But there was absolutely nothing to guarantee that he was actually trustworthy. They just didn't know that, and it turned out that he wasn't. And so am I saying that only Bible-believing religious Jews or Christians are trustworthy? Of course I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that for the most part, people who believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and believe in the words of his message, tend to be a good bet when it comes to integrity. They may not be the smartest people, they may not be the best-looking people, whatever the criteria are you're looking at, but at least there is something to go on, which is a belief system that says, there's certain things I just would not do. And one of the reasons that over the years, communities of Bible believers have tended to be vulnerable to confidence tricksters is because we all tend to project, we all tend to assume other people are similar to us, and they just are trusting because they are trustworthy. And so that is a fitting introduction to what I want to explain in terms of, I call it the God divide. Something that divides people in around the world today, not only in the United States of America. Now, I'm recording this particular show only about 4 days before the 2020 presidential election of November the 3rd. And it's an election between the incumbent President Donald Trump and the Democratic candidate Joe Biden and his vice president Kamala Harris. And I mention this because the polls are probably going to be every bit as unreliable or more unreliable than they were back in 2016. And I'm going to suggest 5 questions that you could ask your friends, associates, neighbors, in order to establish a last-minute poll of your circle of the people you know. But to actually say to people, are you going to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? That's a question that doesn't necessarily yield a reliable response, simply because there is so much vituperation and hostility aimed at President Trump and Vice President Pence that many, many people are reluctant to even acknowledge that they support the president. And so that's not a polling question that does a lot of good. What I'm going to suggest is that the real polling question that, and none of them are doing it, by the way, as far as I know, none of the polling organizations are doing this, but they would do better if they did. And that is focusing not on trying to get answers to direct questions of which candidate you're likely to support and are you a likely voter, etc., etc. All of that largely, in my view, a waste of time, because what is true around the world in many, many countries is even more true in the United States of America, and that is that there is a God divide. And that's a big thing. Over the years, Gallup does a survey in Canada, in the United States, and other countries on the question of how important is God to you. And it's been hovering around about the 70 to 80% range. In other words, 70 to 80% of North American respondents said that God was very important. It's a shockingly high number, but I've looked at many, many surveys on this topic that back up the conclusion that, similar to many other people, perhaps less so in Europe, but in North America, people are very, let me say, obsessed with God in a good sense, not a bad sense. And there've been attempts to remove "In God We Trust" from the currency, and there've been various other attempts to do heavy damage to the God-centric quality of the United States of America, and it always runs into difficulties. It doesn't go smoothly. Now, in many Western countries, the cultural struggle over religion and morality and God that began with the Renaissance has pretty much ended with secularism seeming to win handily. So although many, many people still say God is very important to them, when it comes to control of the levers of power, the secular side wins, having taken charge of education from kindergarten to graduate school, having taken charge of government bureaucracies, and having taken charge largely of popular entertainment. That is why you have a cultural struggle, because there's a lot of people who feel God is very important to them. And in 2016, a lot of those people voted for Donald Trump, even though 82% of the levers of power are not in the hands of people who feel God is important. So you might conclude, as I do, that many people who feel that God is important in their lives feel disempowered and disenfranchised. That's what I think is really going on in the United States of America. Now, in England, for instance, only about 2 or 3% of the population attends church regularly. In the United States, the comparable figure is certainly still over 50%. It's well down from what it was in 1950 and 1960, but it's still up somewhere around about the 50% mark. A lot of Europe finds itself in a post-Christian age. But make no mistake, it seems that evangelical Christianity is making a very strong comeback. Yes, in Europe. So when people say that church attendance is very low in England, what they're talking about is the Anglican Church. And they're absolutely right. The church attendance there is very low. But on my last speaking trip to the United Kingdom, I spoke in over 20 churches, and every single one of them was standing room only. And not just because I was there, that's how they are all the time. So, and those were not Anglican churches. Those were all non-denominational Protestant churches, evangelical churches. It's interesting that President Donald Trump this last week made a statement that his religious affiliation is non-denominational Protestant. In other words, he's saying, I am now an evangelical Christian. Whether you believe him or not will depend on what you feel about him. There are many people who will say this was just a cynical attempt to win more Christian votes. And then there are other people who feel differently. I for one, tend to think that it was probably an authentic conversion, something that has been happening. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if that turns out to be very much the case, because I don't think you can go through what this man has been put through, unlike any other president in the history of the Republic, for the entire 4 years. An extraordinary unwillingness on the part of his political foes to accept the results of the 2016 election. Complete unwillingness. And I should point out that back in the year 2000, the election was between Al Gore, the Democrat, and George W. Bush. George W. Bush won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. The win in the Electoral College was not a big win, but Al Gore called him to concede. And then Al Gore spoke to his lawyers, and would you believe it, those of you who may not remember that election of 2000, Al Gore called George Bush up again and said, by the way, I'm pulling back my concession phone call. I'm not conceding. And it was an astonishing, people were baffled. But that was then when, although the election was finished, Al Gore took it to the courts, and once it hit the courts, it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that was when words like chads and hanging chads and split chads entered the vocabulary. Chads were little things that you, in order to vote in Florida, you used a little device to push them out of the card, the election card, and again in 2000. A democratic unwillingness to accept the election, and in 2016, an unwillingness to accept the outcome of the election. And in the same spirit in which I said earlier that people tend to project and see themselves in others, the left, has been pushing incessantly for the last year on the idea that President Donald Trump will not concede when he loses the election. He will not leave. Well, that's what we've seen the Democrats doing, at least for two elections, 2016 and 2000. And so they make the assumption that the Republican side will do exactly the same. All of that, of course, lies a week into the future, and so we will yet see. But important to understand, I think, that the real distinction, the real gap in America, more than between Republican and Democrat, certainly more than between blacks and whites and men and women and rich and poor, and all the Marxist ideas of what separates people, I think is fundamentally this question of how you feel about God. And the arguments are very, very real. The fact is that America is divided between those who see Bible-based Judeo-Christian morality as vital for a nation's survival, and those who see Bible-based Judeo-Christian morality as nothing but a primitive obstruction to what they see as progress. And the reality is that this divide, this God divide, really covers a lot of very serious arguments. Let me give you a few examples. Here's one question. Are devout followers of God fundamentalists and dangerous, or are they the bulwark of society? I know many people who would say that devout followers of God, whether it's Allah or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the God of the Buddhists, all devout, actually they like Buddhists, the all devout followers of God are fundamentalists and they're dangerous. And I, on the other hand, believe that that followers in the God of the Bible are the bulwark of society. And so that question translates the theme from an abstract argument of, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? But it boils it down to something you can get your arms around. Let me give you another one. Should all faiths be equal in the public eye? Or has America been successful specifically because of its Christian foundations? Okay, so again, I think that America has been successful specifically because of its Christian foundations. I think that Africa is showing enormous promise. I think that long-term investment in Africa makes sense. Why? Because the continent is racing towards Christianity. The continent is becoming more and more and more committed to evangelical Christianity. And that's a good sign, I think. I think it speaks very, very optimistically for the future. But I also know that there are many, many people who regard all faiths as equal, and all faiths should be the same, and America should give exactly the same homage to Wiccanism or to any religion as to Christianity. I'm not talking about legal issues and constitutional matters, obviously. How about this one? Does human suffering disprove God and show God to be either impotent or cruel? Now, I know many people will say, yeah, absolutely. I know many Jewish people, by the way, and I'm going to need to make this distinction very clearly for you, that when I speak about religious, I'm not talking about external trappings of religion. When I speak about religious, I'm not speaking about wearing a certain outfit or talking in a certain way. No, I'm talking about relationship with God at its deepest level. And so, yes, I know many people, including Jewish people, who believe that human suffering says that God is either impotent or cruel. Either he's a God who's not able to stop human suffering, or he's a God who's cruel. If you've been a regular listener of the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, then you will have heard me more than once explain why that is false, and explain how it makes all the sense in the world. That human suffering is a reality, and it's part of the system God put in place. Not because he can't do anything different, and not because he's cruel, but because he's told us already, hey, this is the kind of suffering that will result in certain circumstances. But that's not for today. I've done that before. A fourth question. Is belief in God chiefly responsible for all the wars and killing the world has endured and continues to endure? And again, there are many people who completely ignorantly insist that religious wars have killed more people than anything else. It's simply not true. But people are looking for rationales and justifications to dispense with having to think about God. Then here's another one, number 5. Is God a crutch for the simple-minded, while intelligent and independent people rely on themselves? Now, you know that that's the outlook you're going to find in every American public high school, in every GIC, in every government indoctrination camp, in every kindergarten, university. That's the attitude you will get. God is a crutch for the simple-minded people, while the intelligent and independent among us, well, we depend on ourselves. I've heard that so many times in debates and arguments. But that it's laughable and foolish, but that's indeed what many people do believe. Does prayer appeal to the primitive and have no basis for rational understanding? So how do people think about prayer? Right? To say that you're grappling with prayer even to say you have trouble praying, you're not comfortable just opening up in conversation to God. I understand that, but that's very different from saying that praying is primitive and there's nothing rational or understanding about it at all. Again, something utterly ignorant, but lying at the heart of the God divide in America and many other countries today. Can you be a good and decent person without a belief in God? Yes, you absolutely can. I've said that many times. Can you raise good and decent children without a belief in God? Probably not. Can you be sure that your grandchildren will be good and decent people if you are not religious? Absolutely not. With almost impossible. Almost impossible. Not going to happen. If you are a non-religious, good, decent human being, then I'm willing to bet that your grandparents were religious. And if you are a religious person, there is at least a good shot that your children and your grandchildren will be good, decent people. In other words, it goes from religion to decency, but it never goes from decency to decency. In other words, people who are just good and decent, and that's wonderful. I love people who are good and decent people. I'm only sad that they cannot reproduce. It is very, very rare. Now, you might say, well, my children are good and decent, and the answer is you don't really know until they've started raising their own children, or if they don't start raising their own children. But while your children are young, you don't really know if they are good and decent. So that's a very important conversation between decency and goodness on the one hand and connection with God on the other. Does belief in God make people judgmental and require devotees to feel and express contempt and hostility for those who depart from doctrine? Let me say that once again. If you believe in God, does that tend to make you judgmental? And do you feel the need to express contempt and hostility for those who depart from your religion and from your faith? Now, again, I know people who tell stories, both Jewish and Christian. Well, I left the faith. And my family never spoke to me again. All that sort of stuff we get again and again and again. I had a wonderful experience a couple of months ago giving a speech to a group of Amish folks in Pennsylvania, and I had a chance to hear a little bit about what happens to children who leave the faith. And there are doctrinal consequences, but family connections invariably remain strong and close and loving. So there's a lot of misunderstanding on this kind of thing. But what I'm trying to do in giving you these observations is nail down some of the very practical, real life contradictions between those. Whether you're in the United States or in Europe or in Africa or in Asia, it doesn't matter wherever you are. Or Australia, we've got so many wonderful listeners in Australia now. But it's always the same. It's on these. I've just chosen 12 different issues that people really differ on. Is God incompatible with progress and modernity? And again, there are people on one side of the divide who tend to say, yeah, you know what, the more connected people are with God, the more primitive you are, the more you're tied to superstition, and the less you know about progress and modernity. And then on the other hand, you've got many, many people who are deeply devoted to their faith, who are extremely modern and very on top of up-to-date technology. This is a very popular one. This is number 10. Does God require people to renounce passion and exclude sensuality and fun from their lives. Very, very common misbelief. Very common. Oh yeah, that's the real problem with a connection with God. Have you noticed that religious people have no fun, and they don't know what sex is, and they don't have proper relationships, and essentially religion just strips out all the joy and pleasure and fun of life. A lot of people believe that. A lot of people on the pro-God side of the great God divide say, no, not at all. Is that we are built with mechanisms that tend to reduce the response to stimuli. In other words, if you take a certain drug in order to, a bad drug, in order to get high, you notice that as time goes by, you have to take more and more and more because of this rule that the body starts responding less and less to a given stimulus. It's like that in almost every aspect. It's our response to medication. It's also building up immunity, by the way, is part of that, right? For bad. In other words, when a body responds badly to an infection, a little while goes by, and eventually the body is able to deal with it. And so that's how that works. So consequently, if you don't have the set of religious rules and restrictions and regulations that do not rule out joy and passion and fun, not at all. All they do is regulate it in order to make sure that you don't ever reach the point of overstimulation where you end up feeling absolutely nothing. And so in that sense, a religion is a huge gift to the enjoyment of fun and passion of life, very much. And it also holds society together. And that's why, as I've mentioned in the past, one of the great sociologists of the 20th century, Joseph Daniel Unwin, U-N-W-I-N, did this huge study, which has not only never been rebutted or refuted, but it's widely accepted by even to this day. It's just that sociologists in today's secular academic environment do not want to pay any attention to him. But what he said was societies that place no restriction at all on sexuality and sensuality vanish very quickly and produce absolutely nothing. They become societies of waste and dissipation of energy. And the only societies that evolve in a civilized direction are those in which there is regulation of sensuality. I said I'd give you 12. Okay, 11. Does God prefer poor people to rich people? Right, that's a pretty good one. Does God prefer poor people to rich people? And widespread belief that is the case, right? That God must like poor people more than rich people. Somehow, religion and poverty go hand in hand. A lot of people believe that, but it isn't true. As a matter of fact, I happen to know that there is, in the United States of America, there is a private and very quiet organization, a sort of club of wealthy families who donate and give away a huge amount of money. In total, what they give away is equivalent or more than the total gross domestic product of small countries. This is just a group of American wealthy families who give away money, very often to poor countries. and it's a religious organization. These are only religious families. This doesn't include Warren Buffett. It doesn't include Bill Gates. It only includes religious Christian families. And so, does God prefer poor people to rich people? Yeah, no, not at all. But I understand why people think that. Here's a final one, number 12. Is a belief in evolution a scientific or a religious issue? I like that one, right? Because the truth is that science cannot tell you what to believe. Science cannot tell you how to act. Science cannot even explain things. Now, you may have agreed with me when I said it can't tell you what to believe and it can't tell you how to act, but you probably raise your eyebrows when I tell you that science cannot explain things. But it's absolutely true. Science cannot explain, it can describe. It's a huge difference, right? And it's worthwhile being aware of this. Science cannot explain, but it can describe. In the 17th century, when Sir Isaac Newton began to ponder gravity and the extraordinary force that we know as gravity, he studied it and analyzed and worked hard at it, and finally came up with the inverse square law, saying that the force between, shall we say, the earth and the apple in the apocryphal story was the proportional to the weight or the mass of the earth and the mass of the apple, divided by the distance between them squared. And that turned out to be a perfect description of how the moon traveled around the earth. This gravitational pull then explained that orbits were a conical section, and everything made sense. But nobody knew, least of all Isaac Newton, what the force was. He was not able to explain the force, he could describe it. And to this day, there are ongoing attempts to explain the force of gravity, but they are not conclusive. We don't know. Science is not any good at explaining a thing, although it's wonderful at describing it. So I can measure how oil burns, what grades of oil burn at what temperatures, and how much thermal capacity is there in oil versus coal. But I can't explain why oil burns and vinegar doesn't. I mean, I can in the context of what we understand to be the oxidation process of burning, but there could be other ways of burning as well. Science doesn't explain things. It certainly doesn't tell you how to behave, and it certainly doesn't tell you what to believe. But even on explaining things, science just isn't any good. Describing, yes. Explaining, not. And that is one of the inherent shortcomings in the so-called theory of evolution, because it's stepping outside of what science does. It's the same reason that when politicians say, we must follow the science on the coronavirus, and they mean that that's indicating that we must shut down and we must wear masks and we must damage the economy. All of that is a complete abuse of science. That sort of statement is made by somebody with zero scientific background. As I've often said before, science does not lie, but people do. Even scientists lie. And so we just have to be very understanding that when my number 12 one, which was, is belief in evolution a scientific or religious issue? Yeah, a whole lot of people are going to say it's a scientific issue, but a whole lot of other of us are going to say, no, it's a religious issue, meaning that belief in evolution is as much a belief as a belief in creationism, These are two beliefs, and the notion that science proves it's rubbish. I mean, it's just not true. It's obviously only the result of a completely secular academic environment where metaphysical involvement in the origins of life are excluded de facto. The academy will not accept the notion of a metaphysical participation in the origins of life. Therefore, they've got to find something that comes close to working, and, well, maybe evolution will be it. But everybody who understands these things understands the huge flaws and fundamental fallacies within the so-called theory of evolution. People get that. The problem is that they operate within an academic environment in which no alternative can be tolerated. Albert Einstein was essentially a secular Jew. Now, yeah, I know about the statements, God doesn't play dice with the cosmos and so on and so forth, but one of the interesting things is that there used to be, again, going back to the first half of the 20th century, a lot of discussion about the origins of the universe. And most philosophers from the Enlightenment onwards, and most scientists into the 20th century, went with a steady state theory. Basically, the universe has always been here. End of story. It just is. That's all there is to it. And again, I totally understand that. You're grappling with this problem. And along came some very key people in that period who proved beyond all shadow of a doubt in the expanding universe. Now, the expanding universe is I'm not going to try and explain it now. I'm not even sure that I have 100% full grasp of it myself, but it essentially means that everything in the universe is expanding, and because everything is expanding, you can't notice it or feel it because it's all expanding at the same time, and everything is expanding proportionately. But, you see, if that is the case, then we can run the movie backwards and say, okay, what happens right as we watch the movie in real time? The universe is expanding. But let's reverse the movie. Let's run the tape back and see what happens. And we see the universe contracting and contracting and contracting. And sure enough, eventually it contracts, and you see on the movie nothing but a point and then a blinding flash of light and this huge explosion of material moving outwards, and the movement outwards never stops, and that's the expanding universe. But that's the origin of the theory I'm sure you've heard called the Big Bang Theory. No, it's not the name of a television program, or maybe it is, but what it really is the explanation. It's not science because it can't be proven, but it's the explanation for the origins of the universe that everybody today, almost every person in physics and mathematics and astronomy accept. It did start with a Big Bang. When Einstein was invited to California to look at was it California or the East Coast? I'm sorry, I don't remember. Einstein came to the United States specifically to look at the research on the Big Bang theory, and he had been opposed to it all along, and he was very honest about it. He said he has to be opposed to it because the Big Bang theory then, and I don't remember if he said allows or requires a deity. And he said, I can't accept that. And that was part of his Jewish atheism. That was just a part of who Albert Einstein was. He was a very high IQ gentleman, but he was blinded on the faith side of things. And so he came. He said, "Yeah, I'm forced to accept the Big Bang theory." And he left it at that. But he was bothered by it because it has these real-world implications of metaphysical involvement in the beginning. At any rate, these are some of the things that divide America down the God divide, what I call the great God divide in America, and it's true in other countries as well, too. So I said I'd give you 5 questions. Those were 12 observations that showed the fissure in the culture. But I now want to give you 5 questions to ask your nearest and dearest, to ask Uncle Fred, to ask the folks you work with if you're interested to know which way they're going to vote. And you don't want to actually ask them which way they vote. These 5 questions will give you a very, very high degree of certainty as to how they vote. Question number 1, do you believe homosexuality is morally wrong? If they say yes, they're voting for President Trump. If they say no, they're voting for Joe Biden. Question number 2, would you look down on someone who had an affair while they're married? Would you look down on, would you think less of somebody who had an affair while married? If they say yes, they're voting for Donald Trump. If they say no, they're voting for Joe Biden. Number 3, do you believe sex before marriage is morally wrong? Do you believe sex before marriage is morally wrong? If they say yes, they're voting for Donald Trump. If they say no, they're voting for Joe Biden. Number 4, is religion very important in your life? If the answer is yes, they're voting for Donald Trump. And if they say no, they're voting for Joe Biden. Question number 5. The rich need. Do you agree that the rich need to do more for society? If they say yes, they're voting for Joe Biden. If they say no, they're voting for Donald Trump. Those are 5 questions. You don't have to ask more than 5, and you may not even have to ask all 5. But for sure, if you get 5 yeses on those questions, then you know you're looking at a Trump voter, and if you get 5 no's, then you're looking at a Biden vote. And I realized I just have to rephrase the last one, because what did I said? The rich need to do more for society. I would have to say, do you disagree? Do you agree that the rich do not need to do more for society? And again, those of you who've listened to previous shows over the last little while will know exactly what I mean by this. In other words, this is not a declaration of venality and greed and selfishness, not at all. To say, do you disagree that the rich need to do more for society, is because you realize that this is part of the left's attempt to carve a canyon into the culture based on the materialism of Marx, namely, the rich are the evil ones. We've got to go get the rich. We've got to tax the rich. And if you think that way, you're voting for Biden. If you think correctly and you understand what's really going on, you're a Trump voter. So that is really pretty much all that I'm going to share with you today on these topics, but I look forward to gauging your interest in them based on the letters you send me, and that will tell me whether I'm going to delve more deeply into any of this later on, or whether we'll leave it for now and do completely different topics in the shows up ahead. But the website is rabbidaniellapin.com. You are able to send me an email on the website, and yes, I will see it. And as many of you have discovered, I answer a fair number of them. The ones that are not overly long, the ones that don't ask me too many questions, and I answer. I actually do. So you go to the rabbidaniellapin.com, RABBI, right? rabbidaniellapin.com, one word, and you can go to the About Us, and then in there you'll see Contact Us, and sure enough, I will see your response that way. So I appreciate that you do that. Also, I'd like you to take a look at the download of my book, America's Real War. It is available right now, and if you really want an explanation of what is really going on, not just in American politics, but in the culture clash that is driving so much of everything that is going on in America and around the world, download yourself a copy of America's Real War. It really will blow you away. I'm serious. It's I don't even know how I wrote it, to tell you the truth. I really feel that I had considerable divine and prophetic assistance, because it's extraordinary to me that a book I wrote nearly 20 years ago is more relevant today than it was when I wrote it. In other words, I made observations when I wrote it that were not that easy to see in society in 2000. But if you look now, you say, oh yeah, that's right, there it is. It's exactly right. So enjoy that. I know you will. It's called America's Real War, and it can be downloaded as an ebook, and quickly, easily, and economically. You will enjoy that, I know. So that brings us close to the end of today, where I can't really go much further for now. But you will remember that this, the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, is the show for when you want to strenuously stretch your soul. You come to this show. And there are many, many shows. You can go back and listen to earlier ones. And when you want to engage in speculative somersaults of the spirit, then you come to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show and enjoy it. And that's exactly why I do it. You be sure to let me know you enjoy it. Be sure to let me know where you're listening from. I love those letters. And I wish you a week of great happiness and fulfillment as you develop your relationships with your faith, with your family, with your friendships, with your finances, and yes, with your physical fitness as well. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.